The studio should have been empty, silent, just an empty room with the lights still on and the tape machine humming in the corner. But someone was singing. All the parts. Every single one. The producer stopped in the hallway and listened. That wasn't the Jackson brothers. That was one voice doing 5 jobs at once, switching between lead and harmony like flipping a light switch, adding drum sounds with his mouth, humming the bass line in the gaps. The sound came through the door in waves, clear, layered, impossibly organized for something that was happening in real time. He looked at the engineer standing next to him. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. They just stood there in the dim hallway, listening to something that shouldn't have been possible. Because the only person in that room was 6-year-old Michael Jackson. 3 hours earlier, the session had started like any other. The Jackson brothers walked into Sound Services' studio on a Tuesday afternoon in late 1964, dragging their feet, hauling canvas bags with street clothes and stage shoes. Michael came in last, barely tall enough to see over the reception desk, wearing a sweater 2 sizes too big and shoes that squeaked on the linoleum. The studio wasn't much. 1 live room, 1 control booth, a couple of mics hanging from ceiling mounts, and a 2-inch tape machine that hummed like a refrigerator. But it was theirs for 3 hours, and the producer, a man named Walt, mid-30s, perpetually tired, had a schedule to keep. "Set up in 5, Walt said through the talkback. "We're running the new arrangement for I Found That Girl. Lead vocal, 3-part harmony, no mistakes, clock's ticking." The older brothers nodded and moved to their spots. Michael sat on an amp case near the back wall, legs dangling, watching. He wasn't singing today. Walt had made that clear during the booking call. Older kids only, the 6-year-old sits this one out. Michael's father had agreed without hesitation. He'll learn by watching. So Michael watched his brothers adjust the mic stands, watched Walt twist knobs and scribble notes on a legal pad, watched the VU meters bounce when someone coughed too close to a capsule. He didn't fidget, didn't complain, just absorbed it all like a sponge soaking up spilled milk. First take. The brothers nailed the melody, but the harmonies clashed in the second verse. Walt stopped the tape. "Jackie, you're stepping on Jermaine's line. Tito, tighten the timing on the turnaround." Second take. Better. Still not right. The pocket felt loose. Walt stopped it again. Third take. Halfway through the bridge, a sharp electrical pop cracked through the monitors. The sound made everyone wince. Walt swore under his breath and punched the talkback. "Hold, we've got a problem." He pulled off his headphones and looked at the engineer, a younger guy named Russ, early 20s, still learning the board. "Channel 3 just died. Might be the preamp. Might be the cable. Go check the patch bay." Russ disappeared into the equipment closet. Walt followed. The brothers looked at each other, shrugged, and decided this was as good a time as any for a break. Jermaine went outside to use the payphone. Tito and Jackie walked to the corner store for sodas. The door swung shut behind them, and Michael was alone. He stayed on the amp case for maybe 30 seconds. Then he slid off, walked to the center of the room, and stood in front of the main microphone. Not close enough to touch it. Just close enough to feel the space it occupied. The studio was quieter than he'd ever heard it. No traffic noise, no talking, no hum from the tape machine, just the faint buzz of the overhead lights and the distant clang of Russ digging through cables in the closet. Michael closed his eyes and started to hum. Not the melody his brothers had been singing. The bass line, the one that anchored the whole song but nobody had recorded yet because they were doing vocals first. He hummed it once, twice, then added the kick drum pattern by tapping his foot on the carpet. The sound was muffled but steady, like a heartbeat underneath everything else. Then he opened his mouth and sang the lead line. His voice, small, clear, precise, filled the room in a way that shouldn't have been possible for a 6-year-old. It wasn't just volume, it was presence. The way the sound occupied space, found the corners, settled into the acoustic treatment on the walls. But here's the part that would have stopped anyone cold. He didn't just sing the lead. He finished the phrase, took a breath, and then sang Jermaine's harmony. Match the tone, match the vibrato. Switch the timbre just enough to make it sound like a different person. Then he cycled to Jackie's part. Higher register, different texture, brighter. He moved through all 3 vocal lines like he was reading off sheet music. Except there was no sheet music, no reference track, no guide vocal playing in headphones. It was all in his head, mapped out in a way that most adult singers never achieve. He added the hand claps, added the hi-hat pulse by making a sharp tss sound between his teeth, added a counter melody in the bridge that no one had written yet, a line that wove between the main harmony and the bass, filling a gap nobody else had noticed was there. He wasn't performing, he was building, stacking parts like Lego blocks, hearing the whole arrangement in his mind and pulling it into the room piece by piece, layer by layer, until the empty studio sounded full. In the equipment closet, Russ finally found the blown cable. He grabbed a replacement, stood up, and heard something that made him stop moving. He looked at Walt. Walt's face had gone completely blank. "Is that—" Walt didn't answer. He walked out of the closet, moved down the hallway, and stopped at the door to the live room. Russ followed. They stood there, side by side, staring through the glass. Michael had his back to them, eyes still closed, swaying slightly. He'd reached the final chorus and he was singing all 3 harmony parts in rapid succession, switching voices so fast it sounded like a small choir. His hands moved in the air, conducting an invisible band. When he got to the last note, he held it, clean, no wobble, no strain, and let it fade into the silence. Then he stopped, opened his eyes, and saw Walt standing in the doorway. Michael's face went red. He stepped back from the mic like he'd been caught stealing. "Sorry, I didn't touch anything. I was just—" Walt held up a hand. Didn't say a word, just turned to Russ and spoke in a voice so quiet it barely carried. "Did you record that?" Russ blinked. "No, the machine's off." Walt closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. "Of course it is." He walked into the live room and crouched down so he was eye level with Michael. "How long were we gone?" "I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. "And you were doing that the whole time?" Michael shook his head. "Just the last part. I was listening first." "Listening to what? There's nothing playing." "I was listening to the quiet. You can hear everything better when it's quiet, all the parts that are missing." Walt stared at him for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked back to the control room, and sat down at the board. He didn't say anything for a solid minute. Just sat there, fingers laced together, staring at the tape machine like it had personally betrayed him. Russ leaned against the doorframe. "You okay?" "That kid just sang 5 parts in perfect sequence, by himself, from memory, at 6 years old." "Yeah." "And we didn't record it." "Yeah." Walt rubbed his face with both hands. "Get the brothers back in here, and this time, Michael's on the session." "The dad said—" "I don't care what the dad said. That kid just did in 20 minutes what most session singers can't do in 20 years. He's singing. End of discussion." When the brothers came back, Walt was already rewriting the track sheet. He'd added a new line at the top. Lead harmony, M. Jackson, age 6. Jermaine saw it first and nudged Jackie. Jackie looked at Michael, then at Walt. "He's singing. He's singing. Tito grinned. Took you long enough to figure that out? Walt didn't smile. He just pointed at the mic. Michael, center position. Everyone else, step back. I want to hear what he's got when it's just him. Michael walked to the microphone. Walt hit record. From the top, no backing track, just you. Show me what you did when you thought no one was listening. The tape rolled. Michael sang. And this time, Walt made sure every second of it was captured. When the take finished, he didn't stop the machine right away. He let the tape run for an extra 10 seconds just in case. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at Russ. Mark that take and make a safety copy tonight. You think it's that good? I think 20 years from now, someone's going to ask me if I was there when Michael Jackson recorded his first real session, and I want to be able to say yes. The session wrapped 2 hours later. Walt walked the group to the lobby, handed the father a reel-to-reel copy, and shook his hand. Your boy's got something. I don't know what to call it. But whatever it is, don't let anyone talk him out of it. The father nodded, but Walt wasn't sure he understood. So he crouched down one more time and looked at Michael. You know what you did in there today? Michael shook his head. You listened first. Most people never learn that. They just make noise and hope it works. But you... He tapped Michael's chest, right over his heart. You heard the whole song before you sang a single note. That's not something I can teach. That's something you either have or you don't. Michael didn't say anything. Just looked at Walt with those wide, serious eyes that made him seem older than he was. Walt stood up and watched them leave. When the door closed, Russ came up beside him. Think we'll see him again? Walt smiled for the first time all day. I think the whole world's gonna see him again. 30 years later, that tape surfaced in a storage unit auction in Pasadena. The buyer didn't know what it was, just saw Jackson on the label and a date from 1964, figured it might be worth something. When he played it on a refurbished reel-to-reel, he heard a 6-year-old kid singing 5 parts in perfect harmony, switching voices like changing channels on a radio, building an arrangement in real time with nothing but his voice and his instincts. He called a music historian. The historian called a journalist. The journalist tracked down Walt, now retired, living in a small house outside Detroit with a garden and a dog, and shelves full of records he'd worked on over 5 decades. They asked him what he remembered most about that session. Walt was 73 by then. He'd produced hundreds of records, worked with legends, had gold plaques on his wall. But when they asked about Michael Jackson at 6 years old, his eyes got bright and he didn't hesitate. The quiet. When I opened that door and heard him singing, the first thing I thought was, that's what genius sounds like when no one's watching. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't performing. He was just in it, in the music. Like it was a place he could go when the world got too loud. They asked if he'd ever heard anything like it again. From any artist, any session, any studio, anywhere. He shook his head slowly. Once in a lifetime, that's all you get. Most producers spend their whole careers hoping to be in the room when it happens. I got lucky. I was 20 minutes late, and that lateness gave me a front row seat to something nobody was supposed to see. He paused, looked out the window. You know what the saddest part is? We almost didn't record him that day. I almost sent him home. Almost told his father, maybe, next year. If that cable hadn't blown, if we hadn't left him alone in that room, nobody would have known. He would have kept it inside, and the world would have lost something it didn't even know it needed. The journalist asked one more question. Do you still have a copy of that tape? Walt smiled. I have 3, one in a safe deposit box, one in my basement, one I keep in my car just in case. Because someday, someone's going to ask me to prove I was there. And I want to be able to say, here, listen. This is what 6 years old sounds like when it knows something the rest of us are still trying to learn.